I'm presenting on a leadership, an inclusionary leadership program that our school lovingly called Triplympics. With all of the accessibility rights and legislation movements in the last 40 years, the fight to normalize people with disabilities is more important than ever. In most cases, people with disabilities are looked on as non-equals in society. As this community is now the largest minority population in the United States, it's time to level the playing field by using inclusionary leadership programming models. Colleges and universities can use this event that we enduringly named after our school mascot, Trip. We called it Trip Olympics. So what it does is it focuses on the fact that we can balance everybody. We work with the clubs and organizations on campus, and they build the games suited to themselves with a 25% game ratio of athletic based and the rest not. This gives everybody a chance to win the games and quite possibly take the overall grand prize. This teaches people that if we work together on all of our strengths and then we support each other with the weaknesses, it ultimately will lead to a journey to ultimate success. The teams we used were 6-person teams, students and or faculty. You may have the option of a person with disability as a 7th player. I talked about that. The games we referred to the athletic departments on for the 25%, and they made games that were based on a normal like basketball game, but they narrowed it down to 6 people, bracket style, such as like pig or a pitching contest. The other games were done by clubs. For example, the Gaming and Anime Club did a Madden style football bracket on gaming. Hosting of trivia by the honors clubs, nursing programs use some of their techniques and stuff, so that way they had an equal chance of winning as well. It gave the clubs chances to work together. They tabled events to advertise the games that they created. They worked with members of the community that were disabled to build momentum into the inclusionary leadership model. It's a great time to introduce unified sports to the schools if they don't already participate. Special Olympics now has its own club that can be utilized in the schools that, again, uses the inclusionary leadership model. And then we did fundraising using our mascot's paw print, which we had signed, we hung up on the walls, we sold them for $1, and that money went back into the clubs and the organizations that support people with disabilities. And that's what I have. Does anybody have any questions?
So I have a question. So the teams, you're saying that only it's a mixed ability team, right?
Yes.
Not 7th person is a person with a disability.
So some of the teams were completely mixed, and some teams had the 7th player with a more profound disability.
And how did the athletes, only because, you know, I was just like, what was their attitude towards this whole adventure?
They were really, really welcoming into it. They enjoyed having the opportunity to go and play in the other areas of the school. So they actually participated with the cookie decorating contest and stuff like that the culinary department came up with. And it was really a unique experience.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Could you tell us again what the original impetus was for this team?
I'm sorry, I did not hear you.
I think he asked what the original emphasis was.
It was to bring awareness of the different abilities and the lack of accessibility for some things. Not everybody can do everything. So just bringing awareness. My intention in starting this was to kind of normalize stuff. We were talking about bringing an accessibility programming into the school and wanted to make more awareness before that started. So there was less uncomfortability and maybe less injustice or fear. I do not believe that the effort will be sustained at the institution. The powers maybe didn't really pick up on it and I will be leaving, but I do look to include it into the institution I start in the fall. As well as actually bringing the Special Olympics Club to the the institution as well. I don't know that I have a good answer for this. The dynamics at the school that I go to is a little limiting. And I don't think that they're quite as open and ready for the changes that need to happen to bring these programs in and to do the stuff, unfortunately. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cassie. I can go next if no one else wants to. Okay, I'll just share my screen then. Okay, can everyone see it? Thumbs up. Awesome. So see the top. Is the top still up? Okay, so I did a year-long research assistant position. I had a research assistant position, and through that position, we really focused on mobile application use among speech language pathologists. So this study was actually first conducted before COVID happened. So it's really interesting because we were able to see kind of the heightened use of technology that COVID, in a good way and a bad way, has provided us. Just so some background. So my mentor and I conducted over 100 studies with speech language pathologists, their clients, and the parents along with that. And with that information, we were able to create 24 semi-structured interviews. So with that, we took the common themes amongst each kind of interview, and we compiled it under one specific, we called it our code book. So in the bottom left corner, you can kind of see an example of what our code book looked like. And under these code books, we had different categories, and those categories ranged from financial, economic, motivational factors, influential factors, things that affected basically how students learn and how students learn through the use of technology. So as we were compiling all this information, we took a greater look into apps specifically, and seeing what kind of correlation these apps can help these students with different learning disorders. So we were able to see that there are different apps were able to affect different children and people based on their age demographic, their interests, etc. So after we came about that, we were able to figure out that an app such as YouTube adhered to specifically the middle school age demographic, and that these children who had cognitive learning speech disorders gravitated more to the visual aspect that an app that YouTube provided. But then on the other end of the spectrum, there's an app specifically I want to talk about. It's called Tokaboka, and it's a Chinese-based app. And it's basically, if you can consider, it's kind of like in the realm of like a lot of motor functions. You're using your fingers, you're slicing things, you're very an interactive game, as I would describe it. And the younger demographic of children from middle school and younger really gravitated towards these type of games. So as a speech language pathologist, a light went on in our heads, or my mentors' heads, and I was along for the ride, that we were able to use these games, these motivating factors, because all these children want to play, they want to play these apps, they want to play these games. So we were able to use these apps as motivating factors to help these children target their specific disorders. And what came out of that is specifically 2 disorders I want to discuss was cerebral palsy, helped immensely. These apps help children with cerebral palsy immensely, and aphasia. So that's what 2 really interesting things. And the thing that I think I took away out of this the most is that these apps were not meant for speech language pathology. They were not really meant for the educational realm whatsoever, but they indirectly are helping so many children and students. And I personally think that as I enter in this profession of speech language pathology, that technology can be such a positive outlook, just through education in general. I think sometimes technology gets a little bit of a bad rap, of children getting sucked in, always on their phone, an iPad kid, but when used effectively, its success is immense. So that's kind of just like the general synopsis of my presentation. So if anyone has any specific questions, I'm more than happy to answer them, or if anyone's looking at my poster and has questions regarding that, feel free to ask.
Yeah, I wanted to ask what were the applications? Did you test it on autistic children?
Yeah, so first we went through like the interview process. We just kind of had like an open forum conversation with the questions were asked the same to the professional, the client, the parent, and then the child to see how receptive they were. And then through we had to get IRB tested, all like our city training, all of that. And through then we were able to test amongst a smaller demographic of children. And the results were like kind of astounding.
What was the age group of the children with autism?
For the children with autism specifically, it was the elementary age. So it was from kindergarten to 3rd grade. So that was one age demographic. And then we did kind of like our older group was in middle school age, which was 5th and 6th grade.
Great, thank you.
No problem. Yes, I see a hand.
Good morning, Cassie. Thanks for your presentation. I was wondering what the next steps are for your study. Like, are you guys finished with this, or you think that you're going to move on and do some other work that continues this kind of work?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that. So this project is kind of like the foundation of a lot of work that I'm continuing with. And actually my next project that I've submitted to the next conference in the fall is the virtual application use, specifically for stuttering. So we're able to see that specific games target stuttering and indirectly completely. And these children gain so much confidence winning these games, going to the next level, but then having to reciprocate, talk about what they did. So when they're confident in one area, it's like super receptive on the other, and it kind of goes hand in hand. So I'm focusing more on that as we continue just the crossover between virtual applications, speech language pathology, and early intervention. Any other questions?
Cassie, I don't know if you can hear me. I put my question in. the
Cassie,
chat.
you have one in the chat.
Oh, I have one in the chat. Oh boy. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Will you design your own games? That's definitely a loaded question. So my internship last summer, it was coding and designing game. It was designing the platform of games, but it was actually more of like trying to figure out the aerial view of games. So I do have a foundation in like computing that stuff. I don't know what the future might hold for me, but I'm definitely interested in it, and hopefully that will transpire. But I'm definitely not I don't know if I can hold my own against a lot of these more specific computer realms. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it.
I don't know if
I
you
can go next. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, yes.
Okay, perfect. Is my screen shared? Like you can see it? Okay. All right, good morning. My topic today is about consumerism, specifically the microplastics that we kind of shed off every year, just to give a perspective of what our carbon footprint is. Okay, so my introduction. Synthetic fibers make up 10% of all plastic pollution, but they're so small that there's no filter inside the machines to catch them. Instead, these tiny plastic fibers pass through a sewage treatment plants, which often don't have filters fine enough to catch them. Treated wastewater is then often dumped into the rivers or the sea, carrying plastic clothing fibers with it. And a study of 2011 found this, and Napier and his colleagues designed a test to see how these fibers would be shed off in the wash and propose a solution in restoring the ocean's integrity. Okay, so basically Napier and his colleagues got several washing machines of the same brand and tested it with different types of fabrics. So you have polyester, acrylic, and polyester cotton, like a mixed material. And after several washes, they found out that the acrylic shedded off the most, followed by the polyester, and then the mixed polyester and cotton. And then to put that into perspective, they measured that about 100,000 people would make approximately 1.2 million kilograms of fibers each day. And another study, the World Apparel Fiber Consumption Survey, concluded that 60% of it would stem from synthetic fibers, so like your polyester and your acrylic. From a grand scale perspective, the synthetic fiber industry continues to be the most dependable fabric in the world. So it should be noted that the solution is not simply as creating more filters, specifically in countries with dense populations. The concentration of microplastics are just so large because they don't have the resources or better equipment, such as microfiber filters, or better quality of clothes, so they would shed off less. So the total particles floating around all 7 worlds is equivalent to 268,940 tons. And another research study showed how this will affect the animals in the ocean. So they use a fluorescence to show how much plastic consists in their diet. This not only upsets the balance in the food chain, but by eating this material that's not formulated for digestion will affect the health of humanity. An average person ingests over 5,800 particles of synthetic fibers in their lifetime. And the conclusion is that there must be an evolution of ethics that necessitates all members of society to gain awareness and care for the ecological issues that plague the ocean. An awareness of the detriment the clothing industry inflicts on the ocean is present, but not currently enough to shut down businesses. Therefore, by supporting studies that properly filter microfibers in washing machines and practice minimalism, a person avoids careless washing while waiting for a solution that resolves ocean debris. So basically, this was about practicing more eco-minimalism, minimalism that supports the planet, and basically being conscious of everyone's carbon footprint. Because in the last slide, or not last, sorry, this slide, like you can see like it says this is equivalent to 793 pounds per individual, which is a lot of plastic, and you want to minimize the amount that we contribute as much as possible. And does anyone have any questions for me?
I'm not sure if you can hear me, Alexa, but I put a question in the chat.
Oh, I can kind of hear you. Do you mind typing it instead? Sorry.
I did. I put it in the chat.
Oh, I see. This is fascinating. Is there any work done by creating fibers that can be ingested? Oh, not at the moment that I know of. I know that there's a project by, I think it's called like the Friends Collective, that are making a supposedly a better microfiber filter, like one that's like, what's it called? Because you have filters in your washing machine, obviously, but not really ones to filter out microfibers, like super small ones. So I know that there's studies by like a company called Friends Collective that are trying to make like a really effective microfiber filter. And I'm pretty sure it's sold right now, but I think it's a little expensive. So there's also that cost effective pillar that they have to work on. But I don't know any digestible what's it called? Fibers at the moment, especially since like even more raw materials such as cotton has like mixed plastic in it. So yeah.
Have they done like any research into maybe using hemp? I think hemp is easily broke down.
Hemp, like it's extracted from the hemp to make a fiber. Oh, I mean, I didn't know about any of that, but I'm sure that the hemp, I mean, if it's like completely a raw material, then it should be fully digestible then. This has had a massive effect upon the economics of developing nations. Yes, the fashion industry does have an effect on the economy. So does the plastic in a way, because I know a lot of industries choose plastic not because they want to like affect the planet, but because it's the cheaper option, and they have to consider that shipping and the weight of the plastic is just evidently more lighter than a more reusable material like steel. So it does affect their business in a way. Has the UN weighed on this issue? I'm not sure about what the UN's opinion on this issue is. I know that there's more program. Like I know in Switzerland, they have a very different recycling program than us. And in Japan and Korea, they burn all the plastic that they see. We burn it, but we don't burn like all of it. And in Switzerland, they do some sort of like recycling program. I'm not really sure what they do, but it's like very strict. I know you can get like in jail if you just litter. I'm not sure if, I mean, it is like technically because you're avoiding the fish from ingesting it, but at the same time, you also release CO2 emissions. So that's the downfall and that's the downfall of it. But I think to them, they're offsetting it by planting more trees, which will absorb the CO2. But yeah, burning plastic also has. So there's really no one perfect solution. It's just other countries using their own solution. It seems like the best clothing continues to be fur. I mean, I think a lot of people do use fur because like, I mean, you can get it very humanely. You can just shed it. Some people, you know, they actually like kill the animal, but mostly it's just like shedded sheep fur, and they usually shed it in the summer, or at least I know because of what's it called? I'm from Peru, and the clothing that's from the llamas are they're very. Oh, I was trying to make a joke. Sorry, I did not mean that. But yeah, at least in the what's it called? The llamas in Peru. I know that a lot of their clothing are sustainably made and they don't harm the llamas. But I know with a lot of fur they do harm them. So that's why they go to faux fur. But funny joke. Yeah, it is a big industry. I know the same brand that I was talking about with the microfiber filter has their own clothing industry, the Friends Collective. I'm pretty sure there's an Allbirds even in the what's it called, in the Garden State Plaza right now, which is a more sustainable shoe company.
Hi, I can go next unless Brooke wants to. Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Just one second. Sorry for being late. I got locked out of the building. All right, so my name is Cassandra Hartsgrove. I'm a senior at Bridgewater State University in Massachusetts. And this research is part of my honors thesis. And I'm in Dr. Stephanie Penley's Behavioral Neuroscience Lab. So we use the MAM E17 model of schizophrenia, and this is a developmental model using rodents. And in this model, we looked at sex differences in the anatomical effects of exposing them to a teratogen, which is a chemical that disrupts regular development during gestation, which means like during the womb period in the womb. So as we know, schizophrenia, as most of us know, schizophrenia has behavioral, cognitive, and anatomical symptoms. Some of the behavioral traits are more well-known, such as hallucinations and delusions. Cognitive symptoms are less known, and they usually have to do with memory impairments and attentional deficits. And these cognitive and behavioral symptoms are linked to structural and functional abnormalities in the brain. For example, on this photo on the left, that green part inside the brain, that is a ventricular system. The ventricles within the brain are filled with cerebrospinal fluid, and they act like a watery cushion inside the brain to help keep its shape and help carry nutrients from different places. In people with schizophrenia, we see that they have enlarged ventricles. Now, as an adult, if one part of your brain is increasing in size, that means another part of the brain has to decrease in size because the inside of the skull cannot change. There's only a limited amount of space and it does not change throughout your life. So as the ventricles increase in size, we see that the cortex, the wrinkly outer layer of the brain, decreases in size, it shrinks. And we see that the more severe these cognitive and behavioral symptoms are, the more severe this shrinking of the outer layer of the brain. So in order to ethically study this, we use rodents and other animal models, using sometimes mice too, because we are introducing them to a chemical that we know harms them in their development. And by APA standards, we need to do the least amount of harm. So we cannot use humans for this research. So we use the MAM model. MAM, M-A-M, stands for methylase oxymethanol acetate. And this is what we call a teratogen, like I mentioned before, or a mitotoxin. So it's a chemical that when introduced to a pregnant animal, it targets specifically the brains of the animals in its womb. So we introduced this chemical on day 17. We call that embryonic day 17 or gestational day 17. It is 17 days into the pregnancy period. And on that specific day, the brain is developing in a way where the cortex, the wrinkly outer layer of the brain, is being formed. So this chemical disrupts cell division specifically in those areas. And in this model, we see that exposing these rodents to this chemical causes behavioral, cognitive, and anatomical effects that mirror what we see in schizophrenia. Some of the behavioral effects that we see in rodents are hypermobility when they're introduced to stimulant drugs. And that's because of the dopaminergic system within the brain. That's also something that we see in people with schizophrenia. One of the cognitive traits that we see is memory impairments. So their short-term memory and problem-solving skills are less than that of control animals, which reflects what we see in schizophrenia, where patients diagnosed with schizophrenia have memory that performs not as well as people in the control group. And some of the anatomical effects that we see from exposing rodents to MAM that reflect what we see in schizophrenia are ventricular enlargement, which is that increase in size in the ventricles, and cortical reduction, which is the reduced size of the cortex. So in this study specifically, we looked at sex differences because in humans with schizophrenia, based on whether someone is female or male, the disorder looks very different. So we see males with schizophrenia have ventricular enlargement way more severe than women or females with schizophrenia, or people with more estrogen in their bodies. So we used a method called the circling method, and we did that by first sacrificing the rats, unfortunately, and then we sliced their brain into 5 micrometer thick slices and put them on microscope slides. We stain it with a chemical that stains each cell body a bright purpley blue color. In the middle of this poster here, that is the actual rat brain used in our study. And it's kind of faint, but I highlighted the lateral ventricles of the ventricular system with yellow on the right side. So you can see that is what we're circling with the circling method. And that involves carefully tracing on each slide, and there's thousands on each slide. We carefully trace this structure and we get the area. And by calculating the area of successive slices, we can then estimate the volume of this 3D shape within the brain. So by doing that, we found that the male rats that were introduced to MAM had greater ventricular volume than the female rats that were introduced to MAM. They also had greater ventricular volume than the male rats. And this shows that there is a sex and treatment interaction when it comes to ventricular volume. We also found that both male and female rodents that were introduced to MAM had significantly less brain weight. You can see that here on the lowest graph in the middle of the screen. This shows brain weight. The two columns on the left are both MAM animals, which means they are both in the treatment groups. MAM females had the lowest average brain weight, followed by MAM males, then control females and control males. We predicted that control males would have the greatest brain weight because they're, first of all, in the control group, so they didn't have that developmental disruption, and because of the sexual dimorphism that you see in rodents, males are typically bigger. Which makes it so interesting that in the ventricular volume graph you can see here on the right, the control female group, which is the second column in, I'm sorry, the stripes aren't very well able to be seen. The control female group had greater ventricular volume than control males. This was surprising to us. We expected control males to have the second largest or third largest behind MAM females. MAM females had surprisingly low ventricular enlargement. One theory that we think could possibly explain this is that estrogen plays a protective factor against neurodegenerative diseases. So there's a lot of research on schizophrenia and Alzheimer's that suggest that people with higher levels of sex hormones, such as estrogen, could be protected from diseases that target the development of the brain. And this is pretty significant for this research because now that more validity is added to this animal model. Studies that look at different types of treatment, like early intervention treatments and therapies or new drug therapies, can use this model, and it has pretty high predictive validity. Does anybody have any questions? Oops, sorry. Do your mice have schizophrenic episodes? Okay, well, it's really hard to, ask a mouse or a rodent if they have schizophrenia, but there's some pretty good ways to compare the behaviors through their behavior, for one, also their cognitive abilities and their anatomy. So I guess you could say mice have schizophrenic episodes. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Hi, my name is Brooke Tortorelli and I go to Monmouth University. And my presentation is all about drag house culture during times of turmoil. I had taken a sociology of family class this past fall, and we were assigned to research a certain type of family that might be like outside of what is considered the norm. So I've always really enjoyed the documentary called Paris is Burning, which takes place in like the late 1980s, and it focuses on different like drag houses in New York City. So that's kind of what my presentation is about today. And what really shaped the drag house culture during this time was the presence of the AIDS epidemic, because it worsened the social conditions for the people in these communities, since the people in the drag houses were considered like minorities because they were mostly queer people of color. Basically, the people in the drag houses would compete in drag balls for different prizes. As you can see here, they would dress in these flamboyant costumes and get like judged based off of like how real they looked, how passable they would be in society. And from this, I kind of applied it to today when I was doing my research, because the AIDS epidemic kind of parallels the COVID-19 pandemic with the respect that like impoverished people of color were targeted during the COVID-19 pandemic in the same way that they were in the AIDS epidemic. And during these times, these social groups really suffered because times of fear, as we have seen, can brew negativity and hatred, which is why these families are so important. But also, that doesn't justify the hatred that these people received just because they were able to make the best of a situation by making this like beautiful art. It doesn't justify how they were kind of put into these social groups to begin with. So if anyone has any questions based off of what you see here, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Brooke, I have a question.
Yes.
So thanks for this presentation. And my question is this, so you say that families are chosen, and certainly as a family sociologist, I would agree with that. I'm just wondering, how do we translate that sort of chosen, what people culturally choose, and what our laws and policies dictate? In other words, you know, family is chosen for sure on a personal level, but on a legal level, the law doesn't necessarily respect that choice. And I'm just wondering, is there any way that we could, what kind of policies you might think that might support different types of chosen families?
I definitely think that is a very difficult thing to go about, just because family is a social construct, but also legally, there are legally binding connections that people have to one another. And I definitely see that the law doesn't always favor those, and especially for people in communities that are marginalized, they aren't as respected in terms of the law. So I think that something we can learn from this is that there should be more of an emphasis on being able to associate with the people that you choose. But in this case, of like the drag families, most of them had rejection from their biological families, so they were able to choose their families. But in situations where, like, if someone's in like a toxic family relationship that they can't get out of, that is definitely something that I think the law should consider more. I just saw the question in the chat. The question is, can you talk about how drag culture has changed in the years between the AIDS epidemic and COVID-19? I definitely think there has been a huge shift in the time periods between like the late 80s and today, because during that time, drag culture was mostly underground. They would have these balls so they could be hidden, so they could live their true authentic selves without society judging them or being violent towards them. But we still see that there is a lot of violence towards these communities today. So that isn't completely shifted, but you definitely still see like drag queens in the media and kind of being able to be more authentic, but there are still several issues that these communities face today. But I definitely think they're more visible and that we know a lot more about them. And that is a really interesting question about individuals who have survived both calamities. I think that would be a really interesting thing to look at, to see how these individuals have adapted over time, to see how they felt during the AIDS epidemic versus the COVID-19 pandemic, because I know that if like a drag queen works in like a club or something and that is their main source of income, that would definitely have affected them during the COVID-19 pandemic. So that is a really interesting question. I think I'll look into that one.
I have a question, Brooke. Do you think there's any similarities in the way that our government handled the AIDS epidemic and the COVID-19 pandemic?
I definitely think so, because I feel like there's so much unknown during both times, and that really doesn't help people who are already in difficult situations. And when different groups are associated with different things, I think that can be even more harmful to them. Like with the AIDS epidemic, especially, since like they called it like the gay disease and things like that, which was so harmful and so untrue. And this really affected these communities and caused all of this violence towards these people who did not obviously deserve it. And yeah, I definitely think the way that the government has handled these issues, they didn't keep in mind people who are already in these marginalized communities facing these difficult day-to-day situations. I think it would be really interesting for the next step of this research would be kind of to see how it's going to keep evolving, since during such a short period of time things have changed so much. And I'm sure like with the COVID-19 pandemic, no one could have seen that coming, and how this would affect these communities after such like strides have happened, because this was all underground. No one really knew that this was going on. But then you have shows like RuPaul's Drag Race who like bring these things to light, and you see drag queens in the mainstream media. And then for the COVID-19 pandemic to hit, and for these people in these communities to be marginalized even more than they already were before, I think it would be really interesting to see how it changes after that instance. I think just time will kind of tell with this sort of research. I think I wanted to learn more about this topic because I started watching RuPaul's Drag Race when I was like in middle school, and they always mention this documentary called Paris is Burning, and that's where all these pictures are from. And I remember I wanted to watch it, and it was on Netflix at the time, and I was just so fascinated by how these people were able to choose their families And I think that's something that I've always kind of gravitated towards, being able to choose the people in your life regardless of anything. It's just as it says on this poster here in this little picture, because that's a quote from the documentary. It's a question of a group of human beings and a mutual bond despite anything else. And I think when I was assigned the project about like a topic surrounding family, I knew this was the one I wanted to do, just because you're able to make art and be around the people that you care about. And it was just really interesting to learn about. And then learning about the outside things like the epidemics and pandemics that affected these people, it was really interesting to kind of take these things away from that. Thank you.
We can open the floor to questions for all of our panelists. If there were questions.
Thank you all so much.